Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's been a while. My computer is still broke, so these videos are coming out a little more intermittently. That being said, I plan to release a whole bunch in the near future. But let's get to today's event. This is book review number 30. Travel books, do travel books, but actually this one is a history book about a particular place called A Commonwealth of Thieves, The Improbable Birth of Australia, and it's by Thomas Keneally. Right there for you. I don't know if you can see that. That might be a little blurry. But in any case, what this little piece is about is get that adjusted. It's about the early history of Australia, particularly the first fleets that were sent from Britain with the penal settlers, or the penal convicts, I guess would be the correct term, along with Arthur Phillip, the Marine Corps, the Marines, which would later be known as the Rum Corps, and any sort of other military or craft people that were sent along. Now, one of the key things about this time period was first, the galls, or the jails in Britain, were overcrowding. They were having huge overcrowding problems, particularly considering the severe sentences that were given down to common crimes such as petty theft or burglary, forgery, and even some, if it was worth a certain amount, you could be hanged for. So that was one way to get rid of it. But even with get rid of your prison population. But even that being said, there was still extensive overcrowding problems, which led the British government to put these convicts, or these, a lot of them Cockney petty criminals, onto boats on the Thames River. Like, they would decommission old warships that were no longer fit to serve, put them there. But those became an eyesore for the city of London, as well as like Portsmouth and what's that other one? Plymouth, England, that is. And so what the British government decided to do is continue a system of penal resettlement. Now, this had already taken place under This had already taken place under convicts being sent to America, but it wasn't to terra incognita, unknown land or unsettled land. Rather, they were just kind of dumped on America as convicts, as part of the larger society. But around this time period, this is 1788 when the first fleet was sent out, America had gained independence, 1776, as you all know. So what happened was Britain had nowhere to send their prisoners. They could have sent them to northern Canada, or Canada, I guess, like the Nova Scotia area, but the people there were already settled, much like Americans, and were giving a big fit about, these potential low-life scum, even though a lot of them had committed petty crime, not major crime, into their society. So Britain basically looked at two places. They looked at Africa and they looked at Australia. And it was deemed that the African settlement was inhospitable because the tribes around the coast were hostile and there was a lot of disease. And the area that they were actually thinking about was inland, but would have required a long travel distance from Gambia into the inland area of North Africa, or of, I guess, East Africa. So what they decided on, even though it was a long distance and it cost more, was to ship them to Australia, a land that they considered pretty much had no people. Now, of course, we don't know, well, we know this is not the case. The Aborigines had lived there from, I think most people say 30,000 to 50,000 years. And actually, that's what a good chunk of this book is about. I'm really glad that this Thomas Keneally not only looked at the white settlements, but also looked at effects that it had upon, I think it's the Cummerbang and the Eon, I think that's how you pronounce it, peoples of the Sydney Basin. Sydney being the area where the first convicts were sent. But anyway, I guess that's sort of the setup for the book. But the gist of the book is all the comings and goings of the early people and their skittish settlements. Now, one thing that I found interesting was, even though that they had been sent to the far side of the world, one of the most remote places on Earth where the British considered there were no people, within 2 days of landing in Sydney Harbor, somehow the French had gotten word that Philip and the British were planning to start a penal settlement there. So there was actually 2 French battleships on almost the exact opposite side of the world to not necessarily fight them, not necessarily reclaim the territory or dispute the territory, but just kind of observe to see if see the happenings on for only a brief period. But I think it was like 10 days or something. But just to be a little monitor. So I guess that's the French for you. But okay, so I can't really go over every single person that was in this camp. I mean, some stand out, like I think it's Joseph Roos was a convict who was the first person to set down crop in Australia, and was therefore, I guess, in a way, the founder. I mean, in a very minuscule way, but in a way, the founder of Australian agriculture. They talk about just Binalong, who was from the Ewo tribe, who was sort of the first ambassador between the Aborigines and white Australians, white settlers, white convicts, and both his sort of admiration at times, but also his eventual descent into alcoholism, and how he was sort of admired but not really accepted after he had taken this ambassadorship, or not even an ambassadorship, more just like kind of he was kidnapped by Arthur Phillip, the governor, by Arthur Phillip's men, and made into an ambassador. So after that, the people who had never seen whites, or actually had seen James Cook, the only other white settler that had ever even been in the region, and considered them like ghosts, or just like not of this world, I guess you would say, like we would consider aliens. So the white people didn't really consider, or the natives didn't really consider Binalong one of them anymore, because he had associated with these white settlers. Other things that kind of stand out, the appalling conditions of the first, second, and third fleet, particularly the second fleet, which I think it was the Atlas, maybe? No, that's not right. The Neptune? I think it was the Neptune. I think that had deplorable conditions on them. People were chained on all of the decks, or all of the ships initially when they left London and when they settled in Sydney, but most of them would let them out of the chains on the open ocean, because what are they going to do? I guess there could be a mutiny, but because of the way that they monitored things, they were able to let people out of their chains, and also let them up on the floor deck so that they could get fresh air instead of breathing what essentially were their own filth, their own latrine smell. The lower decks where the convicts were kept. This is typical of most of the other fleets, which weren't perfect. But particularly on the second fleet, they didn't let convicts above air. There were massive signs of scurvy, which was true on all three, but particularly bad on the second fleet. Yeah, it was just really appalling conditions. And like, I think of a convict, of the like 600 convicts that left, or maybe like 500, they left on this big Neptune boat. I think like 150 of them died on the. It's a long journey, but that's like way too high on the journey from London to Sydney. So that kind of stood out. I don't know what really more I have to say other than it's applicable. I guess it's also sort of considered the shipping of the time, though, because unless you had an angle like you were a military vessel or you had precious cargo, not basic cargo, which is what these prisoners were treated as, basic cargo, there was really no incentive for you to do that. And actually, the group that was contracted for the second and third fleets was, I think it was like Camden King and something, but that was like the name of the company. And they primarily engaged in shipping slaves from Africa to the southeast coast of America, to be sold as slaves. So if you can imagine the deplorable conditions of those ships, then you can imagine the deplorable condition of these ships. Subtract the fact that there's no incentive because they've already made their money by accepting these prisoners, whereas the slaves, they have to get them to the location and sold in order to make their money. So I'd probably say the slave ships are worse, but just, it's illustrative. What else? I guess what I found kind of fascinating is they set up a second settlement almost immediately after, this being, Arthur Phillip did, this being Norfolk Island, which in later history, aka the next 50 years of penal settlement, would become a place of notorious whippings, and the worst of the convicts were sent there as punishment. But at least in its initial founding, within the first 2 or 3 years, it was considered actually an advantage to go to Norfolk Island because it was felt that they had better soil to grow crops in. Norfolk Island being a very small island, the size of, I don't know, I'd say Manhattan or something like that. Out in 500 miles out in the Tasman Ocean, or Tasman Sea. And also because they had giant trees there, which the British government hoped to eventually use in ship making, but which never came to fruition. What else? There was just sort of I think what draws me to draw a little bit bigger picture here. What draws me to the interesting settlement of Australia versus the interesting settlement of the United States is, in the United States, the incentive either for religious freedom or for mercantile exchange, religious freedom being like Plymouth Rock, and mercantile exchange being like Jamestown. There was a necessity for cohesion, both among the ruling officers as well as to some degree the crew in the commerce side, and definitely the crew and members of the Mayflower that sailed for Plymouth Rock. But what was interesting about these convict fleets is there was really very little glue to hold the society together, other than the fact that they were all in this together. Like, there was no larger theme. I guess the larger theme being they were convicts, but because they came from disparaging backgrounds for different crimes, this was not their choice that they were being shipped. They were being shipped against their will. in most instances. Um, it's kind of surprising that it held as well together as it did. And I'm not in no way saying that it held together well, but even the fact that it held together is kind of stunning. Matter of fact, one of the things that's often mentioned is just how low the rations got in those first 4 years, how, people would be living on salted beef from England that was like 2 years old or a year old, that had been on ships for a year. That unlike, say, like Brazil or I don't know, like Southeast Asia or something like that, there wasn't a readyable food supply with fruit. I mean, there kind of was if you looked, but it wasn't as obvious as it was in Brazil, which was one of the stopovers in the boats that they made. Most of the boats did Canary Islands, Rio, Cape Town, and then on to Sydney, that being the longest part. But okay, to get back to my point, yeah, just the depravity involved, and I think it really got bad actually after. Well, it was bad in the first 4 years, which is the time period of this book, in the sense that there was almost nothing there, and the settlement was so small that it was like a very small candle flame. It could have flickered out. But I think it got really bad in the years following that, because that's when rum started being used as a currency, and there were more of these whippings and what were they called? That corporal punishment that was involved, which is what's more talked about in a book like The Fatal Shore, which covers all 50 years of penal settlement, whereas this is just sort of the initial crux. I also felt that in this book, compared to A Commonwealth of Thieves, in this book compared to The Fatal Shore, they were able to go into more detail of each of the characters. Once again, I'm not going to go through all the characters just because there are so many of them. It's kind of hard to do in a review because these characters were fascinating. I mean, like Mary Bryant, for example. Okay, I'm really ranging here. We're going to get back to Mary Bryant, though. What I was going to say, this, compared to the penal settlement, allowed a lot more detail. So, yeah, like Mary Bryant and Will Bryant, who were the first escapees from the Sydney settlement. Now, modern geography tells us that an unsettled continent the size of Australia, which is about the same size as the continental United States, as mainland non-Russian Europe, there's no people there outside of natives, so getting out of there would be impossible, particularly considering the harsh terrain and hot and cold weather that, well, particularly hot weather that Australia goes through, the lack of abundant natural resources, just the depravity of the convicts in the settlement itself. And some people tried to escape overland by foot, particularly Irish people who had very little concept of geography at that time, tried to walk to China, as it were. Of course, failing miserably. But the one group that did escape were the Bryants, along with about, I think, 6 or 7 other people, who took a fishing boat which was made specifically for Port Jackson, the Sydney harbor, the now famous harbor that Sydney occupies. It's like, I mean, it's as famous as New York City harbor. They took a small fishing boat meant specifically to stay in that harbor and pedaled it 1,500 kilometers, I think. No, it's probably more than, no, I think it was like 1,200 miles, so it's like over 2,000 kilometers. Around Australia, up what is now the Queensland coast, through the Torres Straits, and into Dutch-controlled West Timor, part of the Batavia region, which is back then, which is now known as Indonesia. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, that was an incredible journey on the scale of Mutiny on the Bounty with William Bligh. though it was actually going on at that same time period. And get this, there was a boat that picked them up, was the same boat that picked the people up on Mutiny on the Bounty that didn't escape to Pitcairn Island. So, not Fletcher Christian, which I'll get to in another book coming up recently, but Lost Paradise, check it out. But another group that was on the Mutiny on the Bounty that met the Bryants, and then they were shipped back to England, and actually this woman that was in England committed a petty crime. Will Bryant died on the way, as well as with her 2 kids, but Mary Bryant, English woman, committed petty crime, put in horrible prisons in England, including the decommissioned ships, sentenced to life in Australia on the convict boat, escaped 15,000 mile journey up to Java, Jakarta, Indonesia, East Timor, was captured there, sent back to England, first woman to circumnavigate Australia, look at that, sent back to England and put back in those exact same prisons until 4 years later she was allowed to be a free woman back in England, which is crazy. That is just an insane story. But anyway, okay, I guess I've sort of covered Joseph Roos and Mary Bryant. There were also different administrative people. Like the head of the Marines was, I think, this Collins, and there was also a Rose. The Marines complaining excessively about the governor of the first colony, Arthur Phillips, who kind of towards the end of this book, and I'll wrap it up with this, is commemorated for neither his commerce abilities, nor his religious fervor, nor his revolutionary ideas, his religious fervor like the Mayflower, or his revolutionary ideas like Thomas Jefferson and Lafayette and Washington, or none of the trade people of the day. But was really a sort of admired in Australia, this guy mentions as competent bureaucracy and not really having much of other personality, which Australia clearly has a personality now. But I think one of the reasons Australia is considered such a great society to live in now is because of its function and its ability to just be a common sense, well-run, judicious, non-excessive, non-dramatic society. Well, dramatic, but not in the sense of like trampling on people's human rights or something like that. At least for white people, not for Aborigines. But I guess I'm sort of rambling here. But my point is yeah, maybe Arthur Phillips had a role, if a very small role at the very start of Australia, in seeing that it's a country of laws, it's a country of common sense, it's a country of not revolutionary ideas, but just ideas that kind of serve the purpose needed, which is why I think people in Australia have such a high quality of life today. I mean, not specifically because of Arthur Phillip, but maybe it was an early indicator. But anyway, yeah, a lot of depravity, things kind of rambled along, a lot of deaths, smallpox at one point, fighting and really lack of communication between the Aborigines, two completely distinct cultures, but somehow, some way, without much natural or inherent internal cohesion, somehow they got it done. So, just like I'm getting it done. So the book is A Commonwealth of Thieves. No, I'm going to miss it now. A Commonwealth of Thieves. A Commonwealth of Thieves, An Improbable Birth of Australia. The Improbable Birth of Australia by Thomas Keneally, who is actually an Australian. So let's see if we can get that. Yeah. I don't know if you guys can see that. That's Keneally is his last name. Like I said, native Australian, good guy. I've been rambling forever now. So peace out, you guys. Check out some more of my book reviews later. Yeah, I'm gonna keep them up. I'm gonna be posting some more in the near future. So enjoy them, guys. All right, bye.